Marcus Thompson checked his watch as he pulled into the parking lot of TechFlow Solutions. It was exactly 9:30 in the morning on a bright Tuesday in March. He had driven across town to this tech company located in the business district, where glass buildings reflected the morning sun. Marcus was here for what he thought would be a simple visit to one of his investments. At 38 years old, Marcus had built an impressive career as a venture capitalist. He started from nothing, working his way through college with 3 part-time jobs. After graduating with a degree in computer science, he spent 10 years in the tech industry before moving into investment. Now he ran his own firm, Thompson Ventures, which had invested in over 20 promising companies. TechFlow Solutions was one of them. 6 months ago, his firm had put $5 million into this software company. Marcus believed in staying connected to his investments. He liked to visit the companies in his portfolio without much warning. It helped him see how they really operated day to day. Today he had decided to drop by TechFlow to observe their company culture and see how they treated employees. He wanted to walk around, maybe grab coffee in their break room and get a feel for the place. Because of this casual plan, Marcus had dressed comfortably. He wore dark jeans, a light blue button-down shirt, and clean white sneakers. His usual work uniform involved expensive suits and Italian leather shoes, but today he wanted to blend in. He thought dressing casually would help him see the real TechFlow, not the polished version they might show an important investor in a suit. As Marcus walked through the front doors, cool air conditioning hit his face. The lobby was modern and minimalist with white walls and chrome fixtures. A large sign reading TechFlow Solutions hung behind the reception desk in sleek letters. Potted plants added touches of green to the sterile space. A young woman sat at the reception desk, typing on her computer. Her name tag read Sarah Chen. She looked up when Marcus approached and gave him a professional smile. "Good morning." "How can I help you?" Sarah asked. Marcus was about to introduce himself properly when Sarah glanced at her computer screen and said, "Oh, you must be Monsieur Thompson. You're right on time for your interview." Marcus paused. An interview? There must be some confusion. But before he could correct her, his curiosity kicked in. Someone with similar initials must be interviewing here today. Marcus made investment decisions based on how companies treated people. What better way to see TechFlow's hiring process than to experience it firsthand? "Yes, that's me," Marcus said, deciding to play along for a bit. Sarah stood up and gestured toward the elevators. "Great, the HR team is on the 3rd floor. Just take the elevator up and someone will meet you there. Good luck with your interview." Marcus thanked her and walked to the elevator. As the doors closed and the elevator began to rise, he thought about what he was doing. It was a bit unusual, yes, but he was genuinely curious. How did TechFlow treat job candidates? Were they respectful? Did they give everyone a fair chance? These things mattered to Marcus. He had faced enough closed doors in his own career to care deeply about how others were treated. The elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor. The space was more casual than the lobby, with an open floor plan. Desks were arranged in clusters and employees worked quietly at their computers. Some wore headphones. Others chatted softly with coworkers. Large windows let in natural light. A woman in her 50s approached him. She wore glasses and a friendly expression. "Monsieur Thompson?" she asked. "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "I'm Patricia from HR. Thank you for coming in. We're running just a few minutes behind schedule, but we'll get you started soon. Can I get you some water or coffee while you wait?" "Water would be great, thank you," Marcus said. Patricia led him down a hallway past several offices and meeting rooms. She stopped at a conference room with glass walls. Inside, Marcus could see a long table with chairs around it. "You can wait in here. I'll bring your water, and Brad and Jennifer will be with you shortly. They're our senior recruiters." Marcus settled into a chair facing the door. The conference room was nothing special. A whiteboard hung on one wall, still marked with notes from a previous meeting. The table was clean but showed signs of heavy use. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see employees moving about the office. Patricia returned with a bottle of water. "They'll be right with you," she said before leaving. Marcus sat alone in the conference room, drinking his water and watching the office activity outside. He noticed the workforce appeared to be mostly white and Asian. In the 5 minutes he sat there, he saw maybe 2 or 3 black employees walk past. For a tech company in a diverse city, that seemed off balance. The door opened and 2 people entered, A man in his early 40s came in first. He had blonde hair styled with gel and wore an expensive-looking suit. Right behind him came a woman around the same age with red hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a gray dress and carried a tablet. Both of them stopped short when they saw Marcus. The change in their expressions was subtle but noticeable. The man's smile became slightly more forced. The woman's eyebrows rose just a fraction. Marcus had seen these micro-expressions before in his life. He knew what they meant. "Hello, I'm Brad Stevens," the man said, extending his hand. His handshake was brief and loose. "This is Jennifer Walsh. We'll be conducting your interview today." Jennifer nodded at Marcus but didn't offer to shake his hand. She sat down across from him and opened her tablet. Brad took the seat next to her. "So," Brad said, glancing at some papers in front of him, "you're here for the junior developer position." Marcus hadn't known what position the real M. Thompson was applying for, but now he did. Junior developer. He had been a senior software engineer before moving into investment, so he certainly knew the field well enough. "That's right," Marcus confirmed. Jennifer tapped on her tablet without looking up. "Your resume says you have experience with Python and JavaScript. Is that correct?" "Yes, among other languages," Marcus replied. Brad leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with an expression that seemed both curious and dismissive. "I have to say you're dressed pretty casually for a job interview. Is this how you normally present yourself to potential employers?" The comment hung in the air. Marcus had interviewed hundreds of candidates himself over the years. He knew that remark had nothing to do with his clothes and everything to do with what Brad saw when he looked at him. Marcus kept his voice even and professional. "I believe in being comfortable so I can focus on demonstrating my skills and experience. I hope that's not a problem." Jennifer finally looked up from her tablet. She exchanged a quick glance with Brad. Something unspoken passed between them. Marcus could read it clearly. They had already decided he wasn't right for this position. The interview hadn't even really started yet. "Well," Jennifer said, her tone clipped and formal, "why don't you tell us about your background?" Marcus took a breath. He was going to see this through. He wanted to know exactly how these two operated. His $5 million investment deserved at least that much attention. As he began to answer Jennifer's question, Marcus noticed that neither of them had picked up a pen to take notes. Brad was looking at his phone under the table. Jennifer stared at her tablet, but her eyes weren't moving like she was reading anything. This was going to be interesting, Marcus thought. Very interesting indeed. Marcus began explaining his background, keeping his answer focused on the junior developer role he was supposedly applying for. He talked about programming languages, projects he had worked on, and problem-solving approaches. He kept it simple and relevant the way a good candidate would. Brad barely looked up from his phone. Jennifer tapped her stylus against her tablet in a steady, annoying rhythm. Neither of them seemed interested in what Marcus was saying. When Marcus finished his answer, there was a brief silence. Then Jennifer spoke, her voice carrying an edge that Marcus recognized immediately. "You know," she said, glancing at Brad, "we get a lot of applicants through our affirmative action outreach programs. Is that how you heard about this position?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. He had not mentioned anything about affirmative action. Neither had they. Jennifer had simply assumed. "No," Marcus said calmly. "I found the position through your standard job posting." Brad finally put his phone down. Right. It's just that we have certain initiatives, diversity quotas to meet. Nothing personal." He said it like he was doing Marcus a favor by explaining. Marcus had heard these kinds of comments before, though rarely so directly in a professional setting. The implication was clear. They thought he was only here because the company needed to interview more black candidates. They didn't think he was actually qualified. "I understand you have diversity initiatives," Marcus said, keeping his tone even. "Most forward-thinking companies do. But I'm here because I have the skills for this position. Would you like me to demonstrate any of my technical abilities?" Jennifer waved her hand dismissively. "That won't be necessary. Let's talk about your education instead. Where did you go to school?" Marcus told them about his undergraduate degree in computer science from a well-respected state university. He had graduated with honors, though he didn't mention that detail. He wanted to see how they would react to just the basic information. Brad smirked. "State school? That's nice. We usually prefer candidates from more competitive programs, but I suppose everyone has to start somewhere. The condescension in his voice was thick. Marcus had gone to that state school because it was what he could afford while working 3 jobs. He had competed with students from everywhere and proven himself repeatedly. But Brad had reduced his entire education to something less than, simply because it wasn't an Ivy League name. I found my education prepared me well for the industry, Marcus replied. I've worked on complex systems and led development teams. The quality of your work matters more than the name on your degree. Sure, Jennifer said, though her tone suggested she didn't agree at all. Tell me, how do you handle pressure? Some people just aren't cut out for high-stress environments. They take opportunities seriously enough when they apply. But when the real work starts, she trailed off meaningfully, her eyes flicking to Marcus's casual clothes again. Marcus understood what she was really asking. She was questioning whether he had the work ethic, the dedication, the seriousness to succeed, all because he wore jeans to what he thought was a casual company visit. I've worked in this industry for over a decade, Marcus said. I've handled product launches, system failures at 3 a.m. and tight deadlines. I don't just handle pressure. I thrive in it. Brad laughed, a short, sharp sound. A decade, really? You look pretty young. Are you sure you're not exaggerating a little bit? The insult was thinly veiled. Brad was calling him a liar. Marcus was 38 years old, and he had indeed been working in tech since his mid-20s. But Brad saw a black man in casual clothes and assumed dishonesty. Marcus pulled out his phone. I can show you my LinkedIn profile right now if you'd like to verify my work history. No, that's fine, Jennifer said quickly, as if she didn't want to be proven wrong. Let's move on. Tell me about a time you failed at something. It was a standard interview question, but the way Jennifer asked it carried extra weight. She wasn't asking so she could hear about growth and learning. She was fishing for confirmation of her own biases. Marcus told them about a project early in his career, where he had underestimated the time needed for testing. The software had launched with bugs that took weeks to fix. He explained what he learned about proper time management and the importance of thorough quality assurance. As he spoke, Brad interrupted him. So you're saying you released buggy software to customers? That's pretty unprofessional. Marcus kept his patience. I learned from that experience early in my career. Every developer makes mistakes. What matters is how you grow from them. Some mistakes are worse than others, Brad said. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. And some people keep making the same mistakes over and over. They get hired through diversity programs, and then the company has to deal with underperformance. It puts everyone in an awkward position. There it was again. Brad wasn't even being subtle anymore. He was directly implying that diversity hires were underqualified and caused problems. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced it down. He had sat through enough difficult situations in his career to know how to control his emotions. Getting angry would only confirm whatever stereotypes these two already believed. I don't think diversity and qualification are opposed to each other, Marcus said carefully. The best companies find talented people from all backgrounds. It makes them stronger. Jennifer made a sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff. That's a nice theory. In practice, we have to maintain our standards. TechFlow has a reputation for excellence. We can't compromise that just to make our numbers look good. The implication was crystal clear. Jennifer believed that hiring people like Marcus would compromise their standards. Brad checked his watch in an obvious way. Look, we have several more candidates to see today. I think we've heard enough to get a sense of your background. The interview had barely lasted 15 minutes. Marcus had been in thousands of interviews, both as a candidate and as an interviewer. He knew this was unusually short. They were cutting it off because they had already decided. I do have some questions, Marcus said, if you don't mind. Jennifer sighed like this was a huge inconvenience. Sure, go ahead. What's the company culture like here at TechFlow? Marcus asked. How do you support employee growth and development? Brad gave a practiced answer about mentorship programs and professional development budgets. It sounded like it came straight from a corporate handbook. There was no real detail or genuine enthusiasm. And what about diversity? Marcus continued. I noticed walking through the office that your team doesn't seem very diverse. Is that something the company is actively working on? Jennifer's face tightened. We hire the most qualified candidates regardless of background. If that results in a certain demographic makeup, well, that's just how it is. We're not going to lower our standards, there was that phrase again. Lower our standards. As if hiring black employees or other people of color automatically meant accepting less qualified people. Marcus pressed further. I'm also curious about your funding situation. I understand TechFlow recently received significant investment. How has that changed the company? Brad and Jennifer exchanged glances. This question seemed to make them uncomfortable. Our funding situation is strong, Brad said vaguely. We have solid backing from investors who believe in our vision. But that's really more of a senior leadership topic. For a junior developer position, you'd be focused on coding tasks, not company finances. The dismissal was clear. Brad was telling Marcus to stay in his lane, to not worry about things above his pay grade. If only Brad knew who he was really talking to. I like to understand the big picture of where I work, Marcus said. It helps me feel connected to the company's mission. Jennifer closed her tablet with a sharp click. That's very forward-thinking of you. We'll definitely keep that in mind. Her tone made it obvious she would not be keeping anything in mind. This interview was over, at least in their minds. Brad stood up and Jennifer followed his lead. Well, thank you for coming in today, Monsieur Thompson. We'll be in touch if we decide to move forward with your application. It was the most generic brush-off phrase in hiring. Marcus had heard it 100 times and he had used it himself when he wasn't interested in a candidate. But he had never used it as dismissively as Brad just had. Marcus stood up slowly. He shook Brad's hand, which was even limper than before. Jennifer didn't offer her hand at all. When should I expect to hear back? Marcus asked. We'll contact you if there's a fit, Jennifer said. The hiring process can take several weeks. We have a lot of candidates to consider. Translation: don't hold your breath. Marcus picked up his water bottle and walked toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he paused and turned back. Just out of curiosity, he said, how many people of color work in technical roles here at TechFlow? Brad's smile became even more forced. We don't really keep track of demographics in that way. We just hire the best people. Of course, Marcus said. Thank you for your time. He walked out of the conference room and down the hallway. His mind was racing, but his face remained calm. Patricia from HR was at her desk and gave him a friendly wave as he passed. She seemed nice enough. She probably had no idea what had just happened in that interview. As Marcus approached the elevator, he heard voices behind him. He glanced back and saw Brad and Jennifer standing near the conference room, talking to each other. They didn't realize Marcus could still hear them. Another waste of time, Brad was saying. Why do we even bother with these diversity candidates? It's not like we're going to hire them anyway. Jennifer laughed. HR makes us interview a certain number. We just have to go through the motions. At least this one didn't last too long. Marcus stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, he saw his reflection in the metal. His expression was calm, but his eyes were hard. Those two had no idea who they had just insulted. They had no idea that the man they dismissed so casually was the reason they had jobs at all. Marcus's $5 million kept TechFlow running. His investment paid their salaries. But more than that, Brad and Jennifer had revealed something deeply wrong with this company. This wasn't just about Marcus being treated badly in one interview. If this was how they treated him, how did they treat other candidates of color? How many qualified people had they turned away because of their own prejudices? Marcus rode the elevator down to the lobby, his mind already moving to his next steps. He needed information. He needed to know if this was just two bad employees or if it was a bigger problem. He needed to know what his $5 million was really funding. As he walked past Sarah at the reception desk, she called out cheerfully, "Have a great day. Hope the interview went well." Marcus managed to smile. "Very educational," he said. "Thank you." He walked out into the parking lot and got into his car. Before starting the engine, he pulled out his phone and sent a text to his assistant. "Lisa, I need you to pull all our files on TechFlow Solutions, everything. I'll be back in the office in 30 minutes. He started his car and pulled out of the parking lot. In his rearview mirror, TechFlow Solutions grew smaller, but Marcus wasn't done with them. Not even close. Marcus walked into his office building 40 minutes later. Thompson Ventures occupied the entire 15th floor of a downtown tower. The space was modern but comfortable, with large windows offering views of the city. His team of 12 employees worked in a mix of private offices and collaborative spaces. Lisa Park, his executive assistant, was waiting for him with a thick folder and her tablet. She had worked with Marcus for 5 years and knew him well enough to recognize the tension in his shoulders. "I have everything you asked for," Lisa said, following him into his private office. "All the tech flow documents. Investment agreements, quarterly reports, communications with their CEO. What's going on?" Marcus dropped into his chair and gestured for Lisa to sit. "I just had the most enlightening experience of my career. And not in a good way." He told her everything. The mistaken identity, the interview, every condescending comment and dismissive look. Lisa's expression grew more serious as the story continued. "They didn't know who you were?" she asked when he finished. "Not a clue. To them, I was just another black candidate they could brush off." Marcus opened the folder and started flipping through papers. "I want to know if this is a pattern. 2 racist recruiters are bad enough. But if this is how TechFlow operates as a company, we have a serious problem." Lisa pulled up files on her tablet. "What do you want to start with?" "Their hiring data. How many people of color have they hired since we invested? What does their employee demographic breakdown look like? Do they track this stuff?" "They should," Lisa said. "It was part of the investment agreement, remember? We included language about building an inclusive workplace. Let me check their quarterly reports." While Lisa searched through documents, Marcus pulled up TechFlow's website on his computer. He navigated to their About Us page and looked at the leadership photos. 8 executives stared back at him. All white. All male except for 1 woman. He clicked through to their team page, which showed candid photos of employees working. Marcus counted. Out of roughly 40 people visible in the photos, he saw 2 black employees, 3 who appeared to be Latino, and maybe 8 or 9 Asian employees. The rest were white. "Found it," Lisa said. "Their Q4 report from last year. They submitted demographic data as required." "Want me to read it to you?" "Please," Lisa scrolled on her tablet. Total employees 147. White employees 91. That's about 62%. Asian employees 38 or about 26%. Latino employees 9 or 6%. Black employees 7 or about 5%. Native American 1. Mixed race or other 1. Marcus did the math in his head. Out of 147 employees, only 18 were black or Latino combined. That was barely 12% in a city where those 2 groups made up almost 40% of the population. "What about technical roles specifically?" Marcus asked. "Break it down by department if they provided that." Lisa tapped her screen. "Let me see. Okay, here we go. Engineering department, 54 employees. White 38. Asian 13. Latino 2. Black 1. That's it, 1 black engineer out of 54. Marcus felt his anger growing. "What about their hiring data? How many people did they interview versus hire?" "They don't provide that level of detail in the quarterly reports," Lisa said. "But you could request it. As a primary investor, you have the right to access that information." Marcus thought about it. He could request the data formally, but that would alert TechFlow that he was investigating them. He wanted more information first, quietly. "I need to talk to people who have interviewed there," Marcus said. "Candidates they rejected. Current employees who might have insight. Can we do that without tipping them off?" Lisa considered the question. "We could hire a third-party HR consulting firm. They could conduct anonymous interviews and surveys. Lots of companies use them for culture assessments. TechFlow wouldn't know you initiated it." "Do it," Marcus said immediately. "Find the best firm you can. I want them to talk to rejected candidates from the past year. I want them to survey current employees about workplace culture. And I want it done fast." "I'll make calls this afternoon," Lisa promised. She hesitated, then added, "Marcus, what are you planning to do with this information?" "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted. "But I put $5 million into this company based on promises they made. If they're not keeping those promises, there will be consequences." After Lisa left, Marcus sat alone in his office for a long time. He stared at the TechFlow investment agreement on his desk. He had read this document dozens of times when they were negotiating the deal. Now he went through it again with fresh eyes. There on page 7 was the language his lawyers had insisted on. Company agrees to implement and maintain hiring practices that promote workplace diversity and inclusion, with measurable goals to be reported quarterly to primary investors. Measurable goals. What goals had TechFlow set? Marcus flipped to the appendix where those goals should have been detailed. The section was vague. company will make good faith efforts to recruit diverse candidates and create an inclusive workplace culture. Good faith efforts. That phrase was too soft, too easy to ignore. Marcus made a note to never let his lawyers use such weak language again. His phone buzzed. A text from his college roommate, David Chen, who now worked as a tech recruiter at a different company. Lunch next week? The text read Marcus had an idea. He called David instead of texting back. Hey man, what's up? David answered. Quick question, Marcus said. Do you know anything about TechFlow Solutions? Reputation-wise? There was a pause. TechFlow? Yeah, I know them. Why? I'm looking into them. What have you heard? David's voice became more serious. Off the record? They're not great. I've had candidates interview there and come back with stories, especially candidates of color. The feedback is always the same. Cold reception, dismissive interviewers, then radio silence. Marcus's grip tightened on his phone. How many candidates are we talking about? In the last year? I've personally sent maybe 6 or 7 people there. Different skill levels, all qualified. None of them got offers. Most of them said the interview felt hostile. Did anyone complain officially? To who? David asked. You apply, you interview, you don't get hired. They can reject you for any reason. Unless someone says something explicitly illegal, there's no proof of discrimination. It's just a feeling, a vibe. But man, that vibe has been consistent. Marcus thanked David and ended the call. He sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The picture was getting clearer, and he didn't like what he was seeing. Over the next 3 days, Marcus threw himself into investigating TechFlow. He worked with the HR consulting firm Lisa had hired, reviewing their preliminary findings. He read through employee reviews on websites like Glassdoor. He analyzed the company's hiring patterns using publicly available data. The consulting firm worked fast. They conducted phone interviews with 15 rejected candidates, all people of color who had applied to TechFlow in the past year. The stories were remarkably similar to Marcus's own experience. Cold interviewers, dismissive attitudes, comments about diversity quotas and affirmative action, technical qualifications questioned, cultural fit concerns raised. One woman, a software engineer named Keisha Williams, told the interviewer about her experience. I have a master's degree from Georgia Tech and 5 years of experience. But the recruiter kept asking me if I really understood the technical requirements. Like I couldn't read a job posting. Then he said they were looking for someone with a more traditional background. I'm still not sure what that meant. Marcus knew exactly what it meant. Traditional was code for white. The consulting firm also surveyed current employees anonymously. 23 people responded out of the 40 they contacted. The results were troubling. Employees of color reported feeling excluded from social events. They described being passed over for promotions despite strong performance reviews. Several mentioned that their ideas were often dismissed in meetings, only to be praised when white colleagues repeated them later. 3 people said they had witnessed discriminatory comments from managers but felt afraid to report them. One response stood out to Marcus. I'm one of only 2 black engineers here. The other one left last month. She told me she couldn't take it anymore. The microaggressions, the constant need to prove herself, being the only one who looked like her in every meeting. I'm thinking about leaving too. Marcus made notes as he read through the findings. This wasn't just about Brad and Jennifer. They were symptoms of a larger disease in the company culture. On Friday afternoon, Lisa came into his office with more information. I found something interesting in TechFlow's hiring records. The HR director sent over some data after you requested it through official channels. What did you find? Lisa put a spreadsheet on his desk. In the past 6 months, TechFlow interviewed 47 candidates of color for technical positions. They hired 2. That's about a 4% success rate. And for white candidates, Marcus asked, though he could already guess. They interviewed 38 white candidates. They hired 19. That's 50%. Marcus stared at the numbers. They told a clear story. If you were white and interviewed at TechFlow, you had a 50% chance of getting hired. If you were a person of color, your chances dropped to 4%. Those numbers couldn't be explained by coincidence or qualification differences. That was systematic discrimination. There's more, Lisa said quietly. I looked at who conducted these interviews. Want to guess whose names appear most often? Brad Stevens and Jennifer Walsh. Exactly. They've been the primary interviewers for most candidates of color, and their rejection rate is nearly 100%. Meanwhile, other interviewers at the company have more balanced hiring outcomes. Marcus felt a cold anger settling in his chest. It was different from the hot fury he had felt in the interview. This was calculated, focused. Brad and Jennifer had been gatekeeping for years, keeping people like Marcus out of TechFlow. And somehow they had been allowed to continue. Where was the oversight? Marcus asked. Does TechFlow have an HR director? A DE officer? How did nobody notice this pattern? They have an HR director named Patricia Morrison. She's been there for 8 years. Patricia. Marcus remembered her. The friendly woman who had offered him water. She seemed nice. Maybe she's nice but incompetent, Lisa suggested. Or maybe she noticed but didn't care enough to do anything about it. Marcus made a decision. Schedule a meeting with Robert Mitchell. Robert Mitchell was TechFlow's CEO, the man Marcus had negotiated with when making the investment. He was in his early 50s, a former engineer who had founded the company 12 years ago. In their meetings, he had seemed genuine about building a good company culture. When do you want to meet? Lisa asked Monday. Tell him I'm coming to visit the office. Don't tell him why. I want to see his reaction to everything in person. Should I warn him it's serious? Marcus considered. No, let it be a surprise. Actually, tell him I just want to tour the facility and meet some of the team. Keep it casual. Lisa nodded and left to make the arrangements. Marcus spent the rest of Friday afternoon reviewing all the evidence he had gathered. Documents covered his desk. Spreadsheets, survey responses, interview transcripts. Every piece told the same story. TechFlow Solutions, the company he had invested $5 million in, had a serious discrimination problem. And he was going to make sure they fixed it. That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment looking out at the city lights. He thought about all the qualified people who had been rejected by Brad and Jennifer. All the engineers, designers, and developers who could have contributed to TechFlow, but never got the chance. Their careers had been damaged by two people's prejudices. He thought about the employees of color who currently worked at TechFlow, feeling isolated and undervalued. The woman who had quit because she couldn't take it anymore. The man who was thinking about leaving. Marcus had the power to change this. Not everyone in his position would have discovered what he had discovered today. He had only learned about it because of a mistaken identity and his own curiosity. How many other companies had similar problems that nobody ever uncovered? How many investors put money into companies without checking whether those companies lived up to their stated values? Marcus pulled out his laptop and started making notes. He was going to need a plan for Monday's meeting. He needed to be clear about what he had found and what he expected TechFlow to do about it. But even as he planned, a darker thought crossed his mind. What if Robert Mitchell didn't care? What if the CEO knew about the discrimination and tolerated it? What if fixing the problem wasn't as simple as firing 2 recruiters? Marcus would deal with that if it happened. He had leverage. $5 million bought a lot of influence, and if TechFlow wouldn't change voluntarily, he would force them to change, one way or another. Brad Stevens and Jennifer Walsh's reign was about to end. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and cool air. Marcus dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt, and burgundy tie. His Italian leather shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He looked every bit the successful investor he was. This was not the casual visitor from last week. This was Marcus Thompson, the man whose money kept TechFlow running. His lawyer, James Rodriguez, met him in the parking lot of TechFlow Solutions at 9 o'clock. James was in his mid-40s, sharp and experienced. He carried a leather briefcase that contained copies of all the evidence Marcus had gathered. "You ready for this?" James asked as they walked toward the entrance. "I've been ready since Tuesday," Marcus replied. They walked through the front doors together. Sarah Chen looked up from the reception desk and her eyes went wide. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by confusion. She had seen Marcus before, but now he looked completely different. "Good morning," Marcus said pleasantly. "Marcus Thompson from Thompson Ventures here to see Robert Mitchell. He's expecting me." Sarah's mouth opened slightly. She glanced at her computer screen, then back at Marcus. He could see her trying to piece together how the casually dressed interview candidate from last week was actually Marcus Thompson, the investor. "Of course, Mr. Thompson," she said, recovering quickly. Let Mr. Mitchell know you're here." She picked up her phone with slightly shaking hands. Marcus waited patiently. James stood beside him, every inch the intimidating corporate lawyer. Together they made quite an impression. Less than a minute later, Robert Mitchell burst through the elevator doors. He was a tall man with gray hair and an energetic stride. He wore expensive glasses and a welcoming smile. "Marcus, great to see you." Robert crossed the lobby quickly and shook Marcus's hand with genuine warmth. "I'm so glad you decided to visit. And you brought James. Good to see you too." James nodded politely. "Robert, come on up," Robert said, gesturing to the elevators. "I've cleared my morning. We can tour the facility, and I've arranged for lunch to be brought in. I want you to meet some of our key people." They rode the elevator to the executive floor, which was on the 5th level. Robert's office was spacious and modern, with a large desk, comfortable seating area, and windows overlooking the city. Framed photos of Robert with various tech industry leaders hung on the walls. "Please sit," Robert said, motioning to the leather chairs. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" "We're fine, thank you," Marcus said. He settled into a chair and James sat beside him. Robert took a seat across from them, still smiling. "So," Robert said, leaning back casually, "what brings you by? Just wanted to see how things are running?" Marcus exchanged a glance with James. "Actually, Robert, we need to discuss something serious. There's a problem at TechFlow and we need to address it." Robert's smile faded slightly. "A problem? What kind of problem?" "A discrimination problem," Marcus said directly. "In your hiring practices and company culture." The color drained from Robert's face. "Discrimination? Marcus, that's a serious accusation. What are you talking about?" James opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "We've conducted an investigation into TechFlow's hiring patterns and workplace environment. The findings are concerning." Marcus leaned forward. "Last Tuesday, I came to this office for what I thought would be a casual visit. Due to a scheduling mix-up, I was mistaken for a job candidate. I decided to go along with it to see how your hiring process worked." Robert looked confused. "You went through an interview. Why didn't you just tell them who you were?" "Because I wanted to see the truth," Marcus said. "And I got it. I was interviewed by Brad Stevens and Jennifer Walsh. Robert, they were openly discriminatory. They made comments about affirmative action and diversity quotas. They questioned my qualifications despite my extensive background. They cut the interview short because they had already decided I wasn't good enough, based entirely on how I looked." "That can't be right," Robert said, but his voice lacked confidence. "Brad and Jennifer are professional recruiters. They've been with us for years," "which is part of the problem," James interjected. He handed Robert a document. "This is data on TechFlow's hiring over the past 6 months. Of 47 candidates of color interviewed, only 2 were hired. That's a 4% success rate. For white candidates, the success rate was 50%. Robert took the document with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the numbers and Marcus watched his expression change from defensive to horrified. "This can't be accurate," Robert whispered. "It came from your own HR records," Marcus said. "And Brad Stevens and Jennifer Walsh conducted the majority of these interviews. They've been systematically rejecting qualified candidates of color while hiring white candidates at a much higher rate." Robert set the document down and rubbed his face with both hands. "I didn't know. Marcus, you have to believe me. I had no idea this was happening." "That's another problem," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "As CEO, you should have known. This has been going on for years, apparently. Where was the oversight? Where were the checks on your hiring process?" James added more documents to the pile in front of Robert. "We also conducted anonymous surveys of your current employees. The responses from employees of color paint a picture of a hostile work environment. Exclusion, microaggressions being passed over for promotions. Several are considering leaving." Robert looked genuinely distressed. He stood up and paced to the window, staring out at the city. "I built this company to be different. I wanted TechFlow to be a place where talented people could do great work, regardless of where they came from. But you didn't follow through," Marcus said. "You made promises about diversity and inclusion. Those promises were part of our investment agreement. But the reality doesn't match the promises." Robert turned back to face them. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus stood up, pulling himself to his full height. "First, I want to see Brad Stevens and Jennifer Walsh right now. I want them to know who I really am." Robert looked pained. "Marcus, I'll handle this. You don't need to confront them directly." "Yes, I do," Marcus said firmly. "They need to understand the consequences of their actions. They need to see that the man they dismiss so easily has the power to end their careers here." James stood as well, picking up his briefcase. "This isn't optional, Robert. Marcus has the right to address the people who discriminated against him. Robert hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, let me call them up here. He walked to his desk and picked up his phone. Patricia, can you ask Brad Stevens and Jennifer Walsh to come to my office immediately? Yes, both of them. Thank you. The wait was tense. Marcus stood by the window, looking down at the parking lot 3 floors below. He could see his car, could see people coming and going. Somewhere in this building, Brad and Jennifer were about to have their world turned upside down. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Come in, Robert called out. The door opened, and Brad walked in first, followed by Jennifer. They both wore professional smiles that disappeared the moment they saw Marcus. Brad stopped dead in his tracks. Jennifer actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What? Brad started to say, then trailed off. Marcus turned to face them fully. He didn't smile. He didn't show any emotion at all. He just stared at them, watching the realization dawn on their faces. Jennifer's face had gone completely white. Brad looked like he might be sick. Please close the door, Robert said quietly, and have a seat. Neither of them moved. They stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Marcus like they had seen a ghost. Close the door and sit down, Robert repeated, his voice harder this time. Now! Brad finally moved, closing the door with a shaking hand. He and Jennifer made their way to the chairs on the opposite side of the room from Marcus and James. They sat down slowly, their eyes never leaving Marcus. I think you recognize Mr. Thompson, Robert said, though you might have known him as Monsieur Thompson when you interviewed him last Tuesday. Mr. Mitchell, we can explain, Jennifer started, but Robert held up his hand. You'll have your chance to speak, Robert said. But first let me make something very clear. Marcus Thompson is the founder of Thompson Ventures, the primary investor in TechFlow Solutions. His firm provided the $5 million that has funded our expansion over the past 6 months. Brad's face had now matched Jennifer's in paleness. Marcus could see the exact moment when the full implications hit them. Last Tuesday, Robert continued, Mr. Thompson visited our office. Due to a scheduling error, he was mistaken for a job candidate. He went along with it to observe our hiring process. You two interviewed him. Do you remember that interview? Jennifer nodded mutely. Brad seemed unable to speak at all. Marcus finally spoke, his voice cold and precise. Let me refresh your memory. You made assumptions about me the moment I walked into that conference room. You asked if I was an affirmative action candidate. You dismissed my education because it wasn't from an Ivy League school. You questioned my work experience and essentially called me a liar. You cut the interview short because you had already decided I wasn't qualified, based solely on the color of my skin. That's not what happened, Brad said weakly. We were just conducting a standard interview. Marcus pulled out his phone. Would you like to hear the recording? I recorded the entire interaction. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Please, Mr. Thompson. We didn't mean anything by those comments. We were just trying to assess fit. Fit? Marcus's voice rose slightly. You mean whether a black man would fit into your predominantly white workplace? Whether I would be comfortable being one of only a handful of people who look like me? James stepped forward. We have evidence that this wasn't an isolated incident. You two have been conducting similar interviews for months, maybe years. The data shows a clear pattern of discrimination. Robert stood up and walked over to Brad and Jennifer. He looked down at them with an expression of disappointment and anger. Is this true? Have you been discriminating against candidates of color? We always hire the most qualified people, Jennifer protested. We have standards. Stop, Marcus said sharply. Stop hiding behind that phrase. I heard you say it last week, and I've heard it in reports from other candidates. Most qualified is what you say when you mean people who look like you. I have 15 years of experience in tech. I built a venture capital firm from nothing. I manage millions of dollars in investments. But you two decided in 30 seconds that I wasn't qualified. Brad finally found his voice. If we had known who you were, that's exactly the point, Marcus interrupted. If you had known I was wealthy and powerful, you would have treated me differently. But you shouldn't need to know someone's net worth to treat them with basic respect. Every candidate who walks through that door deserves a fair chance. But you don't give fair chances, do you? You've created a system where people like me don't get hired, don't get opportunities, don't get to prove themselves. The room fell silent. Jennifer was crying openly now. Brad stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. Robert looked at Marcus. What happens now? Marcus took a deep breath. That depends on you, Robert. This is your company. You built it, and you're responsible for the culture here. The question is, are you willing to fix it? Really fix it, not just make surface changes? Tell me what you need, Robert said immediately. Tell me what has to happen, and I'll make it happen. Marcus looked at Brad and Jennifer one more time. They both looked small, diminished. Their power to hurt people had been taken away in this moment, and they knew it. We'll discuss specifics, Marcus said to Robert. But first, these two need to go. They can't be part of TechFlow's future. Robert nodded. He turned to Brad and Jennifer. You're both terminated, effective immediately. Collect your personal belongings and leave the building within the hour. HR will contact you about your final paychecks and benefits. Jennifer sobbed. Brad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't do this. We have rights. We'll sue for wrongful termination. James smiled without humor. Please do. We have recordings, data, witness statements, and testimony from other discriminated candidates. We would welcome the opportunity to present all of that in court. It would make excellent precedent. Brad's bravado crumbled. He and Jennifer walked to the door like condemned prisoners. As Jennifer reached for the handle, she turned back one more time. I'm sorry, she whispered to Marcus. I'm truly sorry. Marcus didn't respond. The apology was too little, too late, and they both knew it. The door closed behind them, and silence filled the office once more. Marcus stood by the window, watching Brad and Jennifer leave the building 20 minutes later. They carried boxes with their personal belongings, walking quickly to their cars with their heads down. Jennifer was still crying. Brad looked angry, his face red and his movements jerky. Robert sat at his desk with his head in his hands. James had taken a seat and was reviewing documents. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. I should have known, Robert finally said, his voice muffled by his hands. I should have been paying attention. This is my fault. Marcus turned away from the window. Yes, it is. But what matters now is what you do next. Robert looked up. His eyes were tired. Tell me. Tell me everything that needs to change. Marcus walked back to his chair and sat down. James pulled out a legal pad and prepared to take notes. First, Marcus said, we need to understand the full scope of the problem. Brad and Jennifer were symptoms, not the disease. How did they operate for so long without anyone noticing or stopping them? I trusted my HR department, Robert said. Patricia Morrison has been with us for 8 years. She runs that department. I assume she was monitoring hiring practices. Then Patricia is either incompetent or complicit, Marcus said bluntly. Either way, she needs to go too. Robert winced but nodded. You're right. I'll handle it this afternoon. James made a note on his pad. You'll need to bring in an external HR director, someone with experience in building inclusive workplaces. We can provide recommendations. Second, Marcus continued, you need to implement real oversight of your hiring process. Blind resume screening to remove names and other identifying information, structured interviews with standardized questions, multiple interviewers for every candidate, with diverse interview panels, and regular audits of hiring data to catch disparities early. I'll start working on that immediately, Robert said. He pulled out his own notepad and began writing. Third, you need to reach out to the candidates who were wrongly rejected. Apologize to them. Offer them another chance to interview with new interviewers. Some of them may have found other jobs by now, but you owe them at least that much. Robert's pen paused. How many candidates are we talking about? Based on our investigation, at least 40 people over the past year, James said. Probably more if we go back further. I'll do it, Robert said quietly. I'll personally reach out to each one. Marcus wasn't finished. Fourth, you need to address the current employees who have been dealing with discrimination. You need to conduct listening sessions where they can share their experiences safely. You need to take their feedback seriously and make changes based on what they tell you. And you need to review your promotion and compensation practices to make sure people of color aren't being held back. Consider it done, Robert said. Fifth, you need to bring in a professional DEI consulting firm, not just for a one-time training session that everyone forgets about in a week. A real partnership where they help you transform your company culture from the ground up. James added, and you need to tie executive compensation to diversity metrics. If your leadership team doesn't have a financial incentive to fix this, it won't be a priority. Robert nodded, still writing. What else? Marcus leaned forward. You need to be transparent about all of this. Put out a statement acknowledging the problem. Don't hide it or downplay it. Tell your employees, your clients, your investors what happened and what you're doing to fix it. People respect honesty more than they respect cover-ups. Won't that damage our reputation? Robert asked. Your reputation is already damaged, Marcus said. Word gets around in the tech community. David Chen, a recruiter I know, told me that TechFlow has a reputation for being hostile to candidates of color. That's the reputation you have right now. Being honest about fixing the problem is the only way to rebuild trust. Robert was quiet for a moment, absorbing everything. Then he asked, What happens if I do all of this? Where does that leave us with the investment? Marcus exchanged a glance with James before answering. If you do all of this genuinely and completely, then we continue our partnership. My firm stays invested in TechFlow, but there will be new terms in our agreement. Quarterly diversity reports with detailed data, regular meetings to review progress, and specific measurable goals that you have to hit. And if we don't hit those goals, Robert asked, then we have a problem, Marcus said simply. I'm not going to fund a company that discriminates. I won't put my name and my money behind that. If TechFlow can't or won't change, I'll pull my investment and I'll make sure everyone in the venture capital world knows why. The threat hung in the air. Robert understood what that would mean. If Marcus Thompson publicly pulled his investment and cited discrimination as the reason, TechFlow would be radioactive. No other investors would touch them. Their reputation would be destroyed, I understand, Robert said. And I promise you, Marcus, I will fix this. Not because you're threatening to pull your investment, though I admit that's a powerful motivator, but because it's the right thing to do. I'm ashamed that this happened under my leadership. I'm ashamed that I didn't see it or stop it. I want to make this right. Marcus studied Robert's face. He had known the CEO for 2 years, and he believed the man was sincere. Robert had made mistakes, serious ones, but he seemed genuinely committed to fixing them. All right, Marcus said. Then let's talk about specifics. James, you have the list of consulting firms. For the next 2 hours, they worked through the details. James had come prepared with recommendations for HR directors, DEI consultants, and workplace culture experts. They discussed timelines, budgets, and concrete action steps. Robert made calls to his executive team, pulling people into the office for emergency meetings. By noon, the basics of a plan were in place. Robert would announce the terminations that afternoon and bring in an interim HR director by the end of the week. The DEI consulting firm would start work on Monday, and Robert would personally begin reaching out to rejected candidates starting tomorrow. Marcus stood to leave, and Robert walked him and James to the elevator. Thank you, Robert said as they waited for the elevator to arrive. I know that sounds strange, thanking you for exposing our failures. But you could have just pulled your investment and walked away. Instead, you're giving us a chance to do better. I'm not doing this for you, Marcus said honestly. I'm doing it for every person who will interview here in the future. For every employee of color who deserves to work in a place that respects them. If TechFlow can become that place, then it's worth saving. The elevator arrived and Marcus and James stepped inside. As the doors began to close, Robert called out, Marcus, I really am sorry. For all of it. Marcus nodded and the doors closed. In the elevator, James turned to him. Do you think he'll follow through? I don't know, Marcus admitted. But we'll be watching. And if he doesn't, we'll make good on that threat. They walked through the lobby. Sarah was at the reception desk and she watched them pass with wide eyes. Marcus wondered what rumors were already spreading through the building. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Brad and Jennifer had been fired. The story would spread, get exaggerated, become office legend. Let it spread, Marcus thought. Let people know that discrimination has consequences. Back at his office, Marcus found Lisa waiting with updates. How did it go? She asked. Brad and Jennifer are gone. Patricia will be gone by end of day. And Robert has committed to major changes. Marcus dropped into his chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation was fading, leaving him tired. Are you okay? Lisa asked gently. Marcus thought about the question. Was he okay? He had just watched 2 people lose their jobs because of their own prejudice. He had forced a CEO to confront ugly truths about his company. He had used his wealth and power as weapons, and while he believed it was justified, it still felt heavy. I'll be okay, he said finally. It needed to be done, Lisa nodded. There are already messages coming in. David Chen called, wanting to know what happened. He heard rumors. and 2 other candidates who interviewed at TechFlow reached out saying they heard you were investigating discrimination there. Word travels fast, Marcus observed. In tech? Always, Lisa said. Do you want me to put out a statement? Marcus considered. Not yet. Let's see what Robert does first. If he handles this well, we'll support him publicly. If he doesn't, then we'll go public with everything. Over the next few days, Marcus watched TechFlow carefully. Robert made the announcement about Brad and Jennifer's termination that afternoon, citing violations of company values and hiring policies. He didn't go into detail, but he didn't have to. People filled in the blanks. Patricia Morrison quietly resigned on Tuesday. Robert brought in Helen Kim, an experienced HR director who had built diversity programs at 2 other tech companies. Helen started on Friday and immediately began conducting interviews with employees. The DEI consulting firm, led by a woman named Dr. Angela Martinez, arrived on Monday morning. They set up shop in a conference room and began their assessment of TechFlow's culture. Marcus checked in with Robert every other day. The reports were encouraging but also disturbing. The more they dug into TechFlow's practices, the more problems they found. The lack of oversight went deeper than just hiring. Promotions, project assignments, and compensation all showed disparities, but Robert was addressing each issue as it emerged. He seemed genuinely committed to the process, even when it was uncomfortable and expensive. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Marcus received an email that made him smile. It was from Keisha Williams, one of the candidates who had been rejected after a hostile interview. Robert had personally called her to apologize and offer her another interview. I was skeptical, Keisha wrote in her email to Marcus. But I decided to give them another chance. The interview was completely different. Professional, respectful, focused on my actual skills. They offered me a senior developer position, and I start next month. Thank you for whatever you did to make this happen. Marcus forwarded the email to Robert with a simple message. This is what success looks like. By the end of the month, TechFlow had rehired 3 previously rejected candidates and extended offers to 2 more. They had implemented blind resume screening and restructured their entire interview process. Dr. Martinez's consulting firm was running workshops on unconscious bias and inclusive leadership. The changes weren't just cosmetic. Marcus could see real shifts in the data. More diverse candidates were making it through the hiring pipeline. Employee survey scores were improving. People of color who worked at TechFlow reported feeling more heard and valued. It wasn't perfect. Culture change took time, and there were still problems to address. But it was progress, real and measurable. One evening, Marcus sat in his office alone, thinking about everything that had happened. He had started this journey by accident, through a case of mistaken identity. But that accident had revealed a truth that needed to be confronted. How many other companies had similar problems? How many qualified people were being turned away because of the biases of the people conducting interviews? How many toxic workplace cultures existed because nobody with the power to change them was paying attention? Marcus couldn't fix every company, but he could fix the ones he invested in. And he could use his story to push for change more broadly. He drafted an email to the other partners in his venture capital firm. Going forward, he wrote, we need to include diversity and inclusion audits as part of our due diligence for every potential investment. We need to make it clear that our money comes with expectations, not just about financial returns, but about how companies treat people. The responses came back quickly, all supportive. His partners had heard about what happened at TechFlow, and they agreed that Thompson Ventures needed to do better. Marcus also started getting invitations to speak at conferences. Other investors wanted to hear his story and learn how to monitor their portfolio companies for discrimination. He accepted several of the invitations, seeing them as opportunities to create broader change. At one conference in Silicon Valley, Marcus stood on stage and told the entire story. He didn't name TechFlow or the individuals involved, but he laid out exactly what had happened and what he had done about it. The uncomfortable truth, Marcus told the audience of investors and tech executives, is that many of our companies probably have similar problems. We just don't see them because we're not looking, or because we don't have to experience them personally. I had to pretend to be a job candidate to discover what was happening. Most of you won't have that experience, so you need to look harder, ask tougher questions, and demand real accountability. The speech got a standing ovation. Afterwards, dozens of people approached Marcus with stories of their own experiences with discrimination or questions about how to implement similar oversight in their investments. Marcus left that conference feeling hopeful. Change was possible. It required attention, commitment, and sometimes confrontation, but it was possible. Back at TechFlow, Robert called Marcus with an update. "I wanted you to be the first to know. We just completed our 3-month review with Dr. Martinez's team. Our hiring is now proportional to our candidate pool across all demographics. Employee satisfaction scores are up 20%. And we promoted our first Black engineer to senior leadership." "Who?" Marcus asked. "Keisha Williams, the woman you helped us bring back. She's been outstanding. She's now leading our mobile development team." Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. Keisha deserved that opportunity. She would have deserved it even if Brad and Jennifer had interviewed her fairly the first time, but at least now she had the chance to prove herself. "That's excellent news, Robert." "There's something else," Robert said. "I want to make our story public. With your permission, I want to write about what happened, what we did wrong, and what we're doing to fix it. I think other companies could learn from our mistakes." Marcus considered. Going public was risky. It would bring scrutiny and criticism, but it would also demonstrate accountability and might help other companies avoid making the same mistakes. "Do it," Marcus said. "Tell the truth, all of it. And make sure Keisha and the other employees who were affected get to share their perspectives too." Robert published his statement 2 weeks later. It was honest, unflinching, and detailed.
He named himself as ultimately responsible for the failures of oversight.
He acknowledged the pain caused to candidates and employees, and he laid out exactly what TechFlow was doing to ensure it never happened again. The response was mixed. Some people praised TechFlow's transparency. Others criticized them for letting the problems exist in the first place. But overall, the tech community seemed to appreciate the honesty. Marcus read through the comments and messages. One stuck with him, from a young Black woman studying computer science. "Thank you for sharing this story. I'm about to start applying for jobs, and I was scared that I'd face discrimination, but wouldn't be able to prove it or do anything about it. Knowing that someone with power used it to make things better gives me hope." That message reminded Marcus why all of this mattered. It wasn't just about TechFlow. It was about creating a world where talented people could succeed regardless of what they looked like, where a young woman entering the tech industry didn't have to be scared of being dismissed before she even had a chance to show her skills. Marcus had the power to push for that world, and he was going to keep using it.